Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Towanda Harris, and I am so excited that you are joining me for my session entitled Curriculum Connections. Welcome to the Ed Collab gathering. I'm sure that you have had the opportunity to see several sessions, or you will have the opportunity to kind of watch several sessions after my session. But I'm definitely honored that you chose to kind of sit with me for a moment of learning. I am grateful to just be a part of this wonderful opportunity that the Educator Collaborative offers every single year for free to educators. It is an awesome way to highlight the brilliance that we have in education. And just this idea around making sure that the decisions that we're making, the choices, the learning, all of these things are centering our most precious a factor in the big picture, which would be our students. So let's go ahead and jump into the learning. Let me just kind of talk about let's talk a little bit about the way that we will engage during this session. Yes, we are not live, meaning I am not talking with you. I can't kind of feed off of your energy, but I still want to provide an opportunity for you to stay engaged as we are learning together. So if you are on Twitter, my tag, excuse me, my Twitter handle is at Dr. T Harris. And if you're going to tweet anything out, it would be great if you could add in the hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering and also hashtag the right tools. As we are learning and I'm going through this session, I will pause and I'll pause for a couple of minutes just to give you time to really process the new learning or the question, the guiding question, as we continue to learn together throughout this session. The session really is, I chose the topic of this session because I've seen a lot of just missed opportunities as I'm going from school to school, class to class, teacher to teacher across the country on this idea on ways that we can make curriculum connections, disrupting negative mindsets around what it means for students to connect versus what it means for students not to connect is important. And I hope that as we go through this session together, that you are reflective and you find moments in which maybe the curriculum or the resource is actually driving the opportunities or what is to believe to be the best way to connect, that you pause and you say, what does this look like for my students? It's okay. As educators, we're flexible. As educators, we're constantly adjusting. And as educators, we have to kind of step back to find out ways that our students can really make these connections and that they can own the learning journey. So I want to pause here. And I want you to think about, just as you are taking your notes or as you have anything to jot down, what words really kind of jump out to you in the title? Curriculum Connections, Disrupting Negative Mindsets Around Student Connections. Okay, so this is a recent tweet that got a lot of attention on my feed, and it reads, "Want to improve student achievement? Improve student culture. When all, capital ALL, students feel seen, valued, and heard, student performance improves." I've worked in education for 20 plus years, and I know that this idea of student culture sometimes takes a back seat, and student achievement, we become bombarded by the test scores. We become bombarded by the idea that we have to close the achievement gap. And you see my air quotes around the achievement gap. But we never pause to ask ourselves, or rarely do we pause to ask ourselves, is it a matter of students not being engaged because they don't understand the new learning? Or is it simply that there are missed opportunities to connect the new learning to our students in their everyday world? I think about Dr. Goldie Muhammad's historically responsive literacy framework, in which she has the pursuits of identity, skills, intellect, as well as criticality. And when I think about the connections that students must make to their everyday world, it makes me think about the criticality piece that Dr. Muhammad talks about, the need for students to be able to take the learning and go out into the world and speak out against oppression, speak out against injustice, speak out against anything that is considered unjust. And so the ways that we equipped our students to do that is that as students are learning, they see how this learning connects to their everyday world. And so as I am making connections, as I am asking questions, as I am doing all of these things, which we'll talk about later on in the session, I am being very mindful of how students are able to connect this learning to their experiences, to their perspectives, hear others' perspectives, and hear others' experiences as well. And that we're not centering the resource or the stories that are told within the books, only the books that we're reading or the packaged curriculums, but that we are also opening up the space in which students are invited in and feel welcome to come in to share their experiences. And with that, students are more engaged. And with that, students do improve their achievement. And with that, students do improve their performance because they are more engaged. So thinking about our first question, our first guiding question, what opportunities do you provide during instruction to invite students into the learning space? I want you to think about that question. And remember, feel free to go on Twitter. You can go ahead and put your response there, or you can reflect, or any noticings or wonderings that you may have about this question or what you've seen. Remember to hashtag the EdCollab Gathering and hashtag the right tools, and tag me at Dr. T. Harris. I'm going to pause and I'm going to play some music for a couple of minutes so that you know when the time is up, when I stop. All right. So hopefully you had some great reflection time. And if you're thinking about, some of the possible types of responses, when you think about opportunities that you provide during instruction that invite students into the learning space, I want you to think about the learning block, the instructional block. It could be during the read aloud, in which you pause and you ask students to share or turn and talk to a neighbor or the person sitting next to you or in your group. That could provide a space for students to be invited into the learning. It could be that as you are allowing students or having students read independently, having one-on-one conversations to ask them about what they're reading and what they're discovering and any new learning that may happen. Also, after your mini lesson, it could be that you allow students or you ask students to turn and work as a group and share out as a class. Again, these are different entry points that you allow students to take the new learning, process it, and then also reflect on it as well. So this is an infographic from not Dr. Excuse me, Zaretta Hammond, her book entitled Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. If you have not read that book, it is an amazing, amazing resource with some really great things to think about when we're thinking of ways to be responsive, to be culturally responsive to our students and to create a space in which all students, especially underrepresented groups of students, students of color, feel welcome into the space, and that the environment is not centered on students being just the idea of students being students of color, but it is about inviting students' brilliance into that space. So yes, we are. Um, People of color, but it's not about that more so as it is that we are creating environments in which I could bring my whole self into that space. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in a classroom. And so when we think about the three levels, you have the surface level, the shallow level, and the deep level. So in her book, she talks about more in depth these three levels, but just really quickly, I'll go through each of the three levels and what it would look like in a classroom. You have the observable elements. So if I were to walk into a classroom, it could simply be I'm looking at the posters on the wall. What images do I see? When I see quotes, whose words are being elevated in the classroom? Going around and looking at the classroom library, which books are being featured. When we talk about access to all books, all different types, all different stories, perspectives, what do I see on the bookshelves? When we are learning together, what types of stories are being told? Am I only depending on the curriculum, the provided curriculum to teach my students, or am I also supplementing and adding in additional stories, additional perspectives? There are so many stories that tell wonderful or share wonderful experiences and perspectives out there. Are you adding those pieces in? And so when we think about surface level, that surface level would be what do I see when I walk into that space? So you see here, it has low emotional charge. Not to say that this is not important, but you cannot stop here. Simply having diverse individuals on your wall, as well as quotes and all of those things, my classroom library, that's great. But how are these stories, these experiences entering into my day to day instruction and engagement with students? Then you have shallow. Shallow would be the unspoken rules and social norms. Nonverbal communication, eye contact, personal space. those things that are said but not said, but you kind of feel it, who continues to um, have their story shared? What as a classroom, who are we continuously affirming? Who are we continuously allowing to be kind of in the forefront of the classroom? And then who is in the background, never getting their story shared or their perspective shared? And also, when we think about eye contact, this could be a positive and it could also be a negative. When we are thinking about different experiences and different opportunities for students to engage in the classroom, what does this look like when students are engaging and we possibly are standing by or making eye contact with students who are typically known for not behaving the way that we think that they should be behaving or not engaging the way that we think that they should be engaging? How are we responding to those particular students? And then also we have deep. Deep would be worldview, core beliefs, group values, cultural archetypes such as collective versus individual, and mental models, funds of knowledge. And so thinking about this piece here, this has intense emotional charge because this would be where all of these things come to life. So if I have all of these images on my walls, all of these quotes, all of these books that are great, that as at the surface level, and I may have nonverbal communication, eye contact with certain students, personal space, all of these things. But how does it carry out into my core beliefs or our class's core beliefs and our group's values? Am I creating this environment in which students are working independently and the ideas are only shared from the teacher to the student? Or am I creating a space in which we collectively are learning together, in which all students feel seen, all students feel valued, all students feel heard? And then mental models. When we think about funds of knowledge, what examples am I giving when I am introducing new learning as to what success looks like? Am I only using what is provided by a resource? Am I only using what society says is a great example or what society says is a great book, but not thinking about the individuals that are sitting before me? It is okay to use students' work as an example of as a great example of the new learning or or the expectations, the shared expectations. And so you see here that this is its intense emotional charge. So now let's think about our second question, our second guiding question. Whose perspectives and experiences are centered in the learning space? All right. So, as you reflected on this question around whose perspectives and experiences are centered in the learning space, you may have had some thoughts around when the learning space is opened up, whose perspectives are shared at all. You know, how what resources or what spaces or what places would I have in which anyone's perspectives or experiences are invited into the learning. So I think about this question makes me think about me as a first year teacher. Years ago, when I first started teaching, the expectation was that we use a scripted curriculum. This curriculum did not have a whole lot of room for flexibility. And as a first year teacher, I am one that wanted to do everything right. And when I say right, it wasn't necessarily by my students, it was to please my administration or, whoever it was that gave me the job. And I not to say in any way that was where I should have been thinking, but I was a first year teacher, young and just ready to change the world and not realizing really how that comes about. Years later, of course, I became a lot more seasoned. But with this curriculum that was scripted, they gave us a teacher's manual. And in that teacher's manual, we were expected to read it as is. So that when we went to grade level team meetings, all of those things, we talked about how our students were responding to the very curriculum that we were sharing with them. And also, where were we on the scope and sequence because we had to get through the curriculum by a certain time. And so, honestly, if I think about perspectives and experiences that were centered, it was whatever the curriculum gave me. So if there was a story about a character that was on a ranch and maybe a white character that was on a ranch, a white female character that was on a ranch, and they cared for horses their entire life, and their family took them to the lake house, all of these things, then that would be the experiences that and perspectives that were going to be centered because the questions only asked about the story and never ever pause to ask about ways that the students would connect with the story. So my students, we were in the inner city and we did not have a lot of horses around. We weren't on a ranch and we didn't have a lot of the experiences that were being shared in the story. So when it came to making curriculum connections, I'm reading through the lesson, but not pausing to ask students to share any experiences or any connections that they made or how their life or experience might be different. And that is okay. And so, again, by default, I began centering the perspectives and the experiences in the learning based on the very curriculum that I was asked to use. And so this makes me think about just that experience, makes me think about the work of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop around mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. So here's a quote from her scholarship. In addition to mirrors, children need books as windows on reality, not just on imaginary worlds. They need books that will help them understand the multicultural nature of the world they live in and their place as a member of just one group, as well as their connection to all other humans. And so here is a picture of this is a picture of my daughter, and I love using this picture because in this picture, it is just this thought of being free. And so let me pause really quickly, and I want you to think about what are your thoughts when you see this picture, as well as what words really jump out to you in this quote. Go ahead and tweet it out if you'd like. And so as you are tweeting this out, I want you to think about the importance of students making these connections and the reliance on just one resource or just one part of the curriculum to make these connections is actually doing a disservice to our students, because in Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's work, she talks about this need for students to see, not only see themselves in the learning, in the literature, but also the windows. Where do they see others' perspectives, others' experiences, and then sliding glass doors? Where are our experiences, our perspectives, where are they similar? And so when we think about discussions in our classroom, what opportunities are we providing for our students to think about these things? Where do I see mirrors? Where do I see windows? Where do I see sliding glass doors? It's not a checklist, it's not cookie cutter, and it changes from room to room. I just recently saw a teacher, the secondary teacher, and she was reading aloud to her students. And of course, I get really, really excited when read alouds are happening. But I really like the way she paused and chunked the text and allowed for students to process what was going on. She allowed students or asked students to turn and talk, what are their reflections, and so forth. But one of the questions she asked was, where do you see mirrors in what I just read? Do you see mirrors? And no one shared any mirrors. And she said, that's okay. But as I was reading this, I saw a mirror. The character had kinky hair. And she said, I could relate to the character's experience with kinky hair, because growing up, or when I wet my hair does become kinky. So I know firsthand what that character is experiencing. Now, the teacher did not center her experiences, simply sharing, I made a connection, to model for students that as they are reading, they may not always have connections, but when they do, it may help them to better connect with what what the author is sharing in the story. And so now, really thinking through this idea of what what stories are being shared, what stories are being centered, what stories are being told in our classrooms, we are faced with the obstacle of banned books. And we know that with banned books, there is also a false just a negative feeling around the books that are being banned. Questions come up, why are they being banned? What stories are being left out? Why can't they be told? All of these things. And so these are different images and different articles. There's an article here that talks about the idea of banning stories and banning books within the classroom, and how people feel about that. So not only am I thinking about just this idea of censorship in this article, A Classroom Without Books, Florida teachers told to remove classroom libraries for review. You see here an image of teachers asking to stop censorship. And then you have, in contrast, and I don't know if you can see down here, ban CRT. And so there are different views of what this looks like and what educators are being faced with. But then we see students. And this right here is the most important picture of them all. When we think about how students are processing this information, why are my stories being left out of classrooms? Why is my experience being left out of classroom? Why are my perspectives being left out of the classroom? And so it's very important that as we are thinking through ways to make curriculum connections, that we are mindful of the opportunities that we allow for students to share in the classroom, their perspectives, their experiences, hear from others' perspectives, hear from others' experiences, as well as just allowing them to see other literature that provides mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors for them. And so the organization, We Need More Diverse Books, they published an article, and it was a blog. And there were three myths that I thought were really, really important to really think about when it comes to this idea of fighting censorship. Myth one, just buy all banned books. Thinking about Zaretta Hammond's work around the levels of culture, and the first level being surface level, buying banned books is not enough. Yes, I can buy all of the banned books in the world, but if those stories and those experiences aren't making its way into my classroom, or I'm not allowing my students to have conversations about their connections to stories, then all I'm doing are buying books. The second myth being donate banned books to local libraries and schools. Well, the thing about that is, yes, we could donate them, but that does not mean that they're able to use or accept all of those books. So we want to try to move away from just being performative. I'm just going to buy them and donate them. But it is important that when opportunities present themselves for us to speak out against these injustices or speak out against books that are being banned, that we as educators do that very thing. And now we go on to myth three. If a book is banned, in a school, then students can just go to their public library. Thinking about access, that is not always something that is easily accessible for students to do, to go to their public library. And so if students aren't getting these stories or getting this experience in the classroom, then there is another obstacle that could present itself to get them at their public library as well. And so with these three myths, in the article, the sentiment really was, we can't just stop here. There are different opportunities that we can engage in to make sure that our students have access to multiple experiences, multiple perspectives, books that allow for our students to make connection to their everyday learning. And so that might mean that I show up at a PTA meeting to educate other parents about the need for these connections. It might mean that I make my way to the local school council meeting to express to other individuals the need to make these connections. It might mean that I go to politicians to do that very thing. And so for whatever it looks like for you, just be mindful that actions need to be taken so that the act of just buying books or just donating or just telling students to go to the library, that we don't rely heavily on those because it could be simply performative, but that we are actually taking action to make sure that our students have more opportunities to make these connections. And so now we have our next question. How are students able to connect their identity to learning? All right. So, how are students able to connect their identity to the learning? Again, going back to the work of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop around mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, this idea of identity is so crucial to the learning. It directly impacts student engagement. It directly impacts student achievement. Don't believe the hype. Students improve their outcomes and their understanding of new learning when they are engaged. So, of course, right now, there's a new movie, a Disney movie coming out, The Little Mermaid. And what the videos that are going viral, which absolutely just melt my heart, are these little girls, little Black girls, watching or being revealed in their blind reactions. It's being revealed that Ariel is Black. And to see their reactions and the joy on their face, it's not so much about Ariel being Black, but it is about the connections now, the additional connections that children, these little Black girls, are able to make to the character. Now, this does not change the storyline in any way, shape, or form. The focus is not about the Little Mermaid being Black, but it is about the diversity of this particular character. And to see the excitement on these little girls' faces is simply heartwarming. But of course, perception is someone's reality. So here are some headlines that are out there around the idea of Ariel now being a Black character versus the original of a white character. I want you to look at these and thinking about the excitement that little girls made to the reaction, excuse me, to the video about the trailer about Ariel being Black. And looking at these titles of someone else's perception being someone's reality on what the intent of this character being Black means. And so it's important that we understand that. If we are not mindful of creating a positive uh, narrative, and disrupting um, negative thoughts around how students make connections, we could fall victim to allowing others to tell us what is most important when students are making connections to the learning. So here, this was recently posted by, it was an IG post, Instagram post by Helping Kids Rise. And from here, there were a lot of titles that highlighted a Black mermaid character so that children don't only see that, yes, the Little Mermaid is a Black character. That is great. That is wonderful. But also, there are other stories out there that highlight Black characters. And I will say this, because this often happens, that these books get brought out just during Black History Month or during months that celebrate certain groups that are highlighted. And the danger in that is that students don't get to see themselves at all times, in all experiences, in all learning spaces, but it's very selective. And so it's important that as educators, we are mindful of what society sometimes places in our ear or places in our students' ear and that we make sure that when students are in our space, in that learning space, that we are collectively learning together, that they have an environment in which they feel welcome, that they feel seen, that they feel valued, and they feel heard. So I leave you with this question. How are you disrupting false narratives in your learning space? How are you disrupting false narratives in your learning space?
Nowadays shit is different. I ain't even trying to say no more.
All right, so hopefully you tweeted some of these things out. How are you disrupting false narratives in your learning space? I'll leave you with this. There is great value in our students walking into all spaces in which they feel seen, valued, and heard. And a major way we could do that as educators is to make curriculum connections. It is important that we are mindful of the resources that we're using, that we are mindful of the stories that we're telling. We are mindful of the images that we are using. If we are not centering students in the learning experience, then students are just going to go through our class, but they are not going to understand how to take the new learning in the class, the learning experience, and apply it to the very world that they live in. So I want to leave you with an upcoming opportunity to learn together. I do have an upcoming webinar. If you go over to my website, www.towandaharris.com, and you will see a page dedicated to an upcoming webinar that I have, How to Create a Culture of Brilliance and Risk-Taking. This webinar will be on September the 29th. So in a couple of weeks, and it will be at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It will be for about an hour, and the sessions are only $20. The idea is that we are in community together, that we are learning together, that we are growing together, so that we can show up for our students. It is important that collectively we create spaces in which all of our students feel welcome, all of our students feel heard and valued. If you are on Twitter, again, that is my Twitter handle. On Instagram, at the bottom you see my Instagram as well as TikTok. Thank you so much for learning with me. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the day of learning with the Ed Collab Fall Gathering. And as always, happy teaching.